Or can you see the slides now? Or
Yes.
cool.
Yes. Thank you.
Cool. So I'm Raymond with the IBS, and I'm gonna go over some quick announcements about upcoming events in the society. So our July Funk lecture will be presented by Dolores, who was supposed to give a talk last month, but she had to unfortunately cancel. And then in 2026, January will be the IBS conference hosted in our house. There will be three upcoming workshops, one on SDMs given by Dr. Babak Naimi, and then another one on distribution models with Bayesian non-parametric regression given by Marisa Barbosa, and then a third one on GBIsh and publishing with it given by Dr. Paulo Borges. Yeah, so the dates for the first um, workshop have yet to be announced, but then Dr. Marcia Barbosas will be hosted in December, and Dr. Paulo Borges is will be held in September and early October. And the cost is $65 USD for members and 85 for non-members. So at the end of the lecture, Michael can only ask one question at a time, so you'll have to either raise your hand or put a question in the chat. So yeah, thank you for attending, and here's where I was going to introduce Michael. So yeah.
Thank you, Raymond. Welcome, everyone. It's my immense pleasure to host Dr. Michael Douglas for today's Funk Lecture series. Dr. Douglas is a retired NOAA research meteorologist who worked for 22 years at the National Severe Storms Laboratory in Norman, Oklahoma. His duties involved both basic research and supervising graduate students in his NOAA-funded research projects. He obtained his undergraduate degree in geophysics from UC Berkeley and master's and PhD in atmospheric science and meteorology from University of Miami and Florida State University, respectively. Most of his NOAA-related research focused on developing climate monitoring networks in developing countries and research into various aspects of tropical weather and climate, and especially monsoonal circulations. Dr. Douglas has a long interest in educational activities, and you'll hear about some of them in today's lecture. During his grad school, he taught earth science courses at a nearby community college on the site and developed earth science-related slide sets, which was pre-internet, so it may not resonate with a lot of our listeners today, but they were sold to 40 universities. To work effectively with many meteorological services in Latin America, he organized short, intensive courses of multi-week duration to provide fundamental background in tropical meteorology concepts and atmospheric observing techniques. In addition, he taught tropical meteorology material during 2 multi-month stints in Mexico City to diverse meteorological communities consisting of both university researchers and operational forecasters. He also helped to organize major multi-month meteorological field programs in both North and South America. He was active in meetings and document preparation during the formative period of the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. Dr. Douglas's international experience is relevant to the IBS community for several reasons. First, it allowed him to travel widely, where he could explore natural history-related subjects he already had an interest in. And secondly, from interaction with the university community in Latin America, he developed a better awareness of the challenges that nature conservation activities face in that region. Since taking early retirement from NOAA in 2013, Dr. Douglas has focused on expanding lifelong interests in various natural history subjects, especially aspects of botany and zoology, and has presented material at 4 IBS meetings and published research in Frontiers of Biogeography, which is our flagship journals. He is a member of the American Meteorological Society as a member of the IBS Education Committee as well. He and his wife maintain an educational website, the Naturalist Travel page, for natural history travelers, And you can visit it and explore it on your own at thetravelingnaturalist.org. With that, I would like to welcome Dr. Douglas to our seminar series. We are very excited to hear from you. And without further ado, please begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. I would never have that long an introduction to my background, but I know I just looked at previous ones and thought, well, maybe I better embellish it a bit, but that's absolutely unnecessary.
I should
Can you see this
state
slide?
we cannot see the slides yet, no.
Okay.
See.
This is the first slide in the talk. As long as you can hear me, that's important. Uh, can you
We
see
can hear
my
you. Yes,
screen yet?
we can hear you, but no, we cannot see the slides.
Okay.
I cannot see them. Raymond, can you see them? No.
Oh,
Is there a way to
I just went ahead and made you the host, so try now.
Okay, can you see my screen?
No, we just see you.
Oh, is there something I need to do in Zoom?
Did you?
Let me see if Zoom, do I need to do anything here to video? Let's see.
Did you say share slides? I'm sure you did. I'm just making sure.
I have the share as a green here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
So if you click on that, there should be.
yeah, I've got it green here, share, and
But have you actually clicked on that button?
yeah, I see there's three options. Multi-panelists can share, one panelist can share at a time. Uh,
Yeah, but I don't think you need to click on that arrow.
ah,
Just click on the
okay.
green button.
Yeah, share sound. Uh, boy. Um, opens. Oh boy, this is crazy because I did this already. Um,
There's plenty of time, so no worries.
okay, let's see. No, can you see anything?
Mm-mm.
Oh boy. View.
It should be as simple as you just pressing this green button, and then it should ask you, oh, perfect. Now,
You see
yes,
something
yes,
now?
yes, we can see it. Great.
Okay, is that the full screen now?
Yes, it is. Great.
Okay, thank you. Uh, okay, that's a title slide, gee whiz. You could change the words a little bit here, but obviously we need to promote our society a little more. Uh, we're not growing. Not that we need to grow. Nothing needs to grow necessarily, but uh, and of course, why would a research? You've already given my background, so I'll skip over that one. Those were just some of the areas I worked in. But why I'm interested in the IBS? Well, this was at me in high school. And so I had my own herbarium and interacted with botanists and the California Native Plant Society, things like that. So I have a long interest in those subjects. It was just at a moderately superficial level, not a global scope or anything like that. I'd encourage everybody who sees this recording to read this, the primer. You'll get a better idea of why I do what I do. It was built out of frustration a few years ago from lack of discussion in our political circles here in the US about many environmental issues. So it's a broad brush covering of many environmental issues from global to local for adults to digest, but not necessarily scientists. On the other hand, I suspect a lot of the IBS members don't have the background in many of those issues. The reason I've been cruising for 2 years since the end of COVID is that I was frustrated by 3 cruises I took with my wife in the previous decade to Alaska, Norway, and northeastern Canada because there was no information about natural aspects of the cruise available to passengers. And we were seeing fascinating things onshore and along the ship, but nobody was providing information about it. So I wrote up a website and described how an interested naturalist could make something out of a typical cruise on a cruise ship. And I forwarded this around, and after a year or two, it landed in the right desk, and the person in charge of hiring and contracting all these people on the ships, from dancers to lecturers, she contacted me. We had a video conference, and she said, "What would you talk about 2 weeks from now on a cruise to Iceland?" Short notice. So basically, that's how I got my first opportunity. But why should the IBS? Why am I talking to an audience? Of course, I'm not talking too much of an audience, but that's okay. Most of the talks I gave here in Norman, Oklahoma, a big university town, didn't have many more people. Well, because 30 million people cruise a year. 30 million people around the world, and most of them are from Europe or North America. That's not unique passengers. There might only be 15 or 20 million unique passengers because some people practically never get off the ship. And they're counted as an independent passenger. But it's absolutely huge audience, and it's relatively captive. You can't jump overboard casually. These are the worst ships out there, honestly, but probably with the greatest potential audience, up to 6,000, 7,000 people. You can get on these ships, 1 week duration, short cruises, party ambience, younger crowd, people who can afford a 1 week vacation away from their work, go essentially nowhere, just go out and back to the near island or the Yucatan Peninsula and have a good time. You can even pretend you're not on the ocean. At the other extreme of cruising is the so-called expedition ships. They can be as small as 50 or less passengers. They typically don't cross big ocean stretches. They hang around coastal regions, the Galapagos Islands. They get ashore, you can see, or maybe you can see the kayaks and zodiacs they use to get ashore almost anywhere. They're about 3 times as expensive as the big ships, 3 or 4 times. That's why most people don't go on them. It's the cost. The intermediate sized ships, like the ones I typically go on, are from 1 to 2 or 3,000 passengers. This is the smaller end, just a 1,400 passenger max. Usually they don't run full, but they can go anywhere. They don't have to have a dock, where they don't have to have a developed port. You put people ashore on their lifeboats, their tenders, so-called. And as long as you have any kind of dock, you can put people ashore. It takes longer, but the truth is this allows access to far more ports around the world than conventional large ship docks. And so that brings the potential of passengers visiting out of the way places where there isn't much infrastructure. Key requirements. If you think about, you want to be a cruise speaker, entertaining is the key word here. You can talk about anything if you can convince the cruise company that you're entertaining. So that's good and that's bad. There are talks about any possible subject out there on a cruise ship. Natural history subjects, science subjects. Astronomy is more common than oceanography or geology or a host of other things. ports around the world. There's websites that show every port out there. And you can click on any one of those or look at these ports and see which ships are scheduled to go, come and arrive, and the dates a year or two in advance. All this stuff is very well choreographed because the ports can usually only handle a certain number of ships. Some ports may have 2 visits a year from a cruise ship, others may have 200. Other websites will show you where cruise ships are at an instant. They update it every 10 minutes or so. All these cruise ships, the major ones, are communicating via satellite. So you can go in, you can zoom in on any part of the world and click on any one of these ships. They're color-coded by the company that operates them. And you see the details of the ship. It's over here, 4,400 passengers in theory, the speed it's going at, the weather conditions, all that kind of stuff. So this is a way, long before you think about doing this kind of thing, you look at all the potential cruises, the ships, and then you approach the company. That's how an individual would do it, an individual speaker thinking about doing this. On the other hand, most speakers, or a great many of them, and all of the entertainers go through agents or companies. All the dancers, and there's hundreds of dancers, maybe thousands employed on these ships. They go through big companies and agents that are constantly working to keep them fully occupied. So this is a typical Miami scene, Saturday evening. These ships go out for a week to different ports and come back. Typical party cruise ships. What kind of skills do you need to be a speaker? Well, if you can emulate these guys, you probably will get on a ship, no problem. So relax. Unfortunately, a great many of us in the scientific community don't have those skills of public speaking. And it's because we don't get much practice in it. If I looked down the hall when I was working with NOAA, most of those people avoided a public talk like the plague because you don't get credit for on your job performance, your annual performance reviews, this kind of stuff for public outreach. And it takes a lot of work to do it right. So most people avoid it because it's not a requirement. And I suspect most IBS members don't give public talks at any level to any group. I might be wrong, and I'd like to see a survey of who does and who doesn't. I know you feel most people are faculty members and they teach a lot, but that's a different audience. Those people have to come to your class and they have to get a grade. So they're going to be there. But a public audience, like on a ship, they'll just walk out if they don't like what you're talking about or they don't find it interesting. So most speakers aren't paid. That's why mostly they're retired, like myself. I don't need an income. So yeah, everybody would like an income, but most speakers are not paid and they know they've got a big pool of potential speakers willing to go on a free cruise, and they do pay for your transportation to and from any part of the world. Get on the ship, free ship, food and lodging for yourself and one significant other. My wife comes with me, and so they cover all those costs. So, but there's no transfer of money. It's not a salary. So for a person who's working age and needs a salary, it's not a job right now. Professional entertainers are paid. And passengers, this bottom line here in yellow, passengers and staff review your performance. Every passenger on a cruise ship reviews what you're at the end of the cruise. They have detailed questionnaires. I've never seen the results of any of those, but the staff, there's two key people on the ship that visit all the venues where entertainment's going on. The piano players, the dancers, they were watching attendance. How do people think? What do they think about the speaker, for example? And they have 2, 3, 4 weeks to get a consensus. And that feeds back to the headquarters of the cruise company, usually in Seattle or somewhere else in the world. And if they don't like what you've done, they kind of say, well, we don't have any cruises available for you. They're diplomatic, but um, what would an IBS speaker? Suppose you're out there listening or listening to the recorded talk. What would you need? Entertainment skills is a big plus. I mean, my first real teaching was at a junior college. Night students, adults, people who came in from work, tired, no microphone, and a big lecture hall with more than 100 students. So you have to be loud. You have to do all the things you can to keep people awake and interested. If you teach a large undergraduate class, it might be similar, except those students need a grade. So well, of course, a community college is similar. Broad knowledge of natural history. In theory, if you're a biogeographer, you already have that. But I say in theory because most of you don't. I suspect you have what is required to do your job. And if you're a young scientist, a postdoc or something, you just simply haven't had time to accumulate a lot of background. Photography helps. Illustrate your talks with your own photos. The more skillful you can be at macro photography, at nature photography in general, you're doing work when you get on shore. You're not just touring with everyone else. And you can use those in the following lectures. And at the bottom, it's very important, willingness to interact with the public and learn new material. You're thrown into a room like this. It's got at least 2 levels. You don't see the upper level here. A lot of folks who have got other things they could do. There's all kinds of activities going on the ship at the same time, not just your talk. So my challenge and your challenge would be typically convert these people into passionate naturalists and science supporters, things like that. They're not. I mean, yes, a third of them are, maybe a half of them. The other half isn't. And you're speaking to only 20% of the ship here. You're given 1 time slot. The performers in the evening get 2 time slots because they fill the stage. And the stage can't hold more than about a third of the ship's passengers at a time. So a great many people aren't coming to your talks. And ideally, those are the ones you'd really like to reach. So my main goals as a speaker, motivate the audience to appreciate the natural world, present important environmental concepts relevant to the cruise. Suppose you pick a cruise like this, and they're all out online. If you do, go to the company's website and look at all the future cruises for the next couple of years. Okay, here's one, round trip to Boston via Canada, Greenland, Iceland. What are you going to talk about? You can only talk on sea days typically, because when they're in port, everybody's off the ship. So you count the number of sea days. If you're into tropical ecology or tropical biogeography, coral reef biodiversity, you might need to brush up. If you want to go to Iceland and Greenland, you better have some background on the Arctic. So you start digging around for books. As a scientist, you can read journals. I mean, even I can read, as an atmospheric scientist, can read the abstract and the summary of most of the biogeography related articles out there. I may not follow the details of what was done, but it's important to be able to scan the literature and see what's get some kind of background. Most of these people in the ship are not specialists by any means, but you will run into PhD geologists, PhD ecologists. They're not giving a talk, but they're in the audience. So you'd be surprised how many well-off, educated people are on some of these cruises. For example, in talks I might give in Greenland, which I did on one of the cruises, but every cruise is different. Honestly, you have to adapt to the specifics of the cruise. Talk about the tundra, how to identify what you see. That's the iNaturalist citizen science type of app. Field photography techniques, Iceland's volcanic and glacial landscapes, that's in the news. Climate change, sea ice, glaciers, all this kind of stuff is also in the news. And kind of stuff that I know in theory more about, weather forecasting and how scientists improve them and how scientists do their work, the whole cycle of proposal, preparation, grants, publications. The average person doesn't know any of that. And, so when politicians ask them, we need more money for this and that, what do you expect the public to think about that? Making iNaturalist observations, my wife is very heavy into that of all kinds. She has a degree in biology, and iNaturalist has really motivated her now to pay attention to everything, absolutely everything out there. And if you go out in the field, uh, whether it's a rainforest or the Arctic tundra, you're overwhelmed by things you don't know what they are. And it's far worse for someone who's not a biologist. And you're not carrying around field guides to this and that or floras and so on. So iNaturalist simplifies things. It's not perfect, but boy, as long as you have internet, that's another issue. You can get some kinds of answers. Islands. Ships go to islands generally, let's face it. Coastal areas or very frequently islands around the world. This gets on all the postcards. Idyllic Icelandic landscape. Well, this lupine here is from Alaska. And it was brought in, I don't know, 60, 70 years ago with restored disturbed areas, and it spread over the whole island. So an entire talk could be on non-native invasive species and the problem with islands. An entire book, Mark Lomolino's recent book. It deals, I'm sure, I haven't seen it, but it deals with that. Every port will have a shore to explore. That's a guarantee. Ships don't fly in anywhere. So brush up on your knowledge of marine algae and other intertidal life. I grew up on the coast of California, marine algae, 10th grade marine biology class, got into marine algae. It's very interesting, the intertidal zone. An entire talk easily on that. I use Google Earth extensively, show where the upcoming ports are, where you can see natural areas. This information won't be available on the ship. The ship is selling excursions that are usually pretty pricey, but the people want to be spoon-fed the stuff, bust over here or there to the scenic attractions. But there is a certain percentage of people on the ship who just want to get out and see what it's really like. So you show them on the imagery, Google Earth imagery, then you show, if you've been there, you show them what it was like. Ideally, you want to show them before you arrive at the port, but sometimes if it's the first time there, you can't do that. And focus on different key things that'll pique their curiosity. Insectivorous plants. This is a pan-Arctic or circumpolar one that you find all over in the northern hemisphere. And there's always birders on the ship, so the more you know about the local birds, the better. In other words, you do have to have a fairly broad knowledge if you want to attract a bigger audience, because some people will only come for what you talk about, the birds or the plants, or listen to your jokes or whatever. Somebody was dragged in because of that, believe it or not. Suppose you're stuck with a San Diego to Brisbane cruise. Somebody has to do that kind of stuff. Hawaii and then the Fiji and, eventually ending up in Brisbane. What are you going to talk about if their last cruise was to Iceland? Well, you can't pull the same slides and talk about that. So 14 talks. Don't read this, even though we probably have time now, but they're all related to nature in some sense, but they wouldn't fit into a biogeography course, a lot of them. Yeah, some of them, biodiversity of islands, environmental concerns in Hawaii, the national parks and nature preserves, the global perspective. There's such a difference. People get off on an island and say, "Where's the park?" Well, there aren't any in this island because there are parks. The land is communally owned. There's these are all issues that people aren't aware of, need to be aware of. Or again, the challenge is you've got let me back up for a second. What is the most important stuff you can give to your audience during the cruise? Think about it. This is a captive audience. You've got to entertain them, but what do you want them to walk away from this cruise with? It's a fantastic opportunity. These people have real money to pay for expensive cruises, even though the cruise line I'm on is not a really high-end one. But some people on the ship have fancy accommodations. And so we'll get to that in a minute, but not everyone snorkels. You give a lecture on coral reefs and the geomorphology of coral reefs and how the ship got into the atoll and so on. There's a lot of neat stuff there that I wasn't aware of. But if you go snorkeling and you'll see stuff like this water is so shallow, I couldn't snorkel over these corals because the water was too shallow. I was afraid I would rub my belly on the coral. So, I mean, this stuff is in the Western Pacific is pretty impressive compared to the Caribbean. And but a lot of people can't get off the ship. They can't get on a tender because they are in a wheelchair or a motor scooter, or they use a walker, and getting on and off onto this tender isn't always trivial. And it's too much work for a lot of people. And if there's a tender involved in getting ashore, they don't go ashore. So if you see things interesting you want to show in the next talk, these are some of the neat stuff. Share your experience with these people and they'll appreciate it. Our last cruise was to up the Amazon to Manaus. 8 days on the Amazon River, plus a bunch of islands there in the Lesser Antilles. 12 talks. One of the most exciting things for me was the sargassum in the near equatorial belt, the only mobile ecosystem on Earth in theory, or at least according to some people. Sea ice might be another, honestly, but sargassum patches. There were large patches for a couple of days. The sargassum is not in the Sargasso Sea primarily. It's more equatorial. And there's a lot to that. It's in the news. It washes up in Caribbean and Florida. There's two principal species. That's what it looks like closer. But it's an entire ecosystem. Fish that are fully adapted to just living in that environment. But the real highlight came on the cruise, came at night, and these are people experiencing the fantasy of going on an Amazon cruise. They're hanging around the lights, looking at the floor, dressed in their fine dinner dresses. What are they doing? They're looking at moths and other neat insects. So there's a fantastic array of moths. The ship is a mile offshore, but the moths still find the lights from the ship. And if you keep showing people these things, more and more people come out at night, start taking pictures of moths with their cell phones. You can get some half-decent pictures that way. The moths are still there in the daytime. People are talking. And the idea is to convert all these people to iNaturalist fanatics. And a lot of people said, yes, I wouldn't have believed that I would be interested in insects. So everything was a bug prior to that. More than 200 moth species. My wife mostly put together a web page that describes all of these species that we saw and photographed, as well as a whole host of other orders and families and stuff of Arthropoda. Let's see. Take-home message here to remind myself on the slide. You can't prepare talks 100% before your cruise. Don't think that you walk on the ship with all 12 talks ready to go. that will look dead. You have to adapt with your own photography, with your own experiences you see during the cruise. That means a whole lot of work. Again, tremendous. I would be getting up at 3 in the morning, worried because of my 11 o'clock in the morning talk wasn't ready. What can the IBS do? These are the last 4 slides. So relax, we're almost done. Conduct an IBS-sponsored virtual workshop. In other words, talking about this really takes about 4 hours to begin to discuss the implications of a lot of this. Develop an IBS entertainment plan for cruise lines. In other words, I can give all the suggestions I want to a cruise company, and the cruise company that I happen to have contracts with, non-paid contracts, on the cruises that I select, they operate 10 ships. 10 ships average 2,000 people each. It's even one cruise line like that has a huge potential audience. But they're not going to listen to me. They're going to listen to a scientific society devised plan a lot more. So the problem is young scientists, they don't want to wait until they retire before they consider doing this. Suppose you have a summer off, you're unfunded or something. Can the IBS certify in some manner speakers? Can they pay for, down here, permanent naturalists aboard? A real salary? I mean, there's a lot of possibilities. If they can pay for dancers and singers and pianists and all the rest, they probably can pay for a permanent naturalist. But you have to sell them on the idea that that's actually going to attract people, because it's going to take one room, one paying room, to host that naturalist. A big, big, big plus here. People come off the ship, go ashore, and there are no tours with a natural history focus, none. So how do they see that? You've got to interact with university tourism / biology departments that will build the infrastructure so that really productive, nature-oriented tours can happen ashore. And that will expand the IBS influence globally, because so many of these islands we visited in the South Pacific had none of this, had none of it. Develop video segments. Remember that 75 or 80% of the audience of the ship's passengers don't come to your talk? Well, if you have a 5-minute snippet of the next port, nature-oriented features, or of this day at sea, what are you likely to see? Everybody will look at that because everybody's got a TV. So you have a much larger audience possible, especially on the ships where there's no speaker, those party cruises. The family that goes on board there at night, okay, kids, it's almost past your bedtime. Look at this little video. You can't go drink with us at the bar. That kind of stuff. So video snippets can have a huge impact. People look at them. And of course, the IBS webpage. Now comes the work for local programmers and IBS members. Key ports and ocean stretches. Can you imagine if I put on a Facebook page of one of these cruise lines, and there's tens of thousands of people following these things? Now, that doesn't mean much because I think the IBS website has thousands of people following it too, and nobody looks at it. But if you said, we have great port information for the independent cruiser on nature-related stuff, you're going to get hundreds and hundreds of hits a day on the IBS website. Is there anything on the IBS website to interest the public at the present time besides that? Suppose you put that information. There's nothing out there for the public. It's scientists talking to scientists. Why should you become an IBS member? It's not clear to me. So you can have a page with a lot of material. Of course, you've got to have people to populate that page. Essentially, next to last, what does the IBS get out of it? Education of lots of adults. Effective public speakers. In other words, if you go on a cruise and give 20, 30, 40, a series of cruises, public talks, and they have great audio visual people to help you set up and do all that. You get a real class because they need to do that for the performers. So you have terrific support in that. But you also get the public speaking experience, discovering what people respond to, what they don't respond to. And then the bottom down here, attract benefactors. The tourism sector may be the single biggest sector out there that could support current or future IBS activities. Have it grow. They're huge. And if you can convince them to become involved in some way, you can do a lot. Last slide. Is this too big for the IBS to tackle? I would have said yes, because I am on the education committee for the last few years. It's hard to get feedback from anyone on anything. This talk, okay, that's a website where I'll put this stuff, but you're also recording it in theory. But it may be too big for the IBS. On the other hand, we're really the society that should be doing it, because biogeography requires knowledge of absolutely everything on planet Earth, everything in the natural sciences. To understand the distribution of life on Earth requires it all of the background, all of the fields, science, the earth sciences, especially. So I don't know. These are just rhetorical questions that I want the society to think about. That's all I have today.